We have already transformed the way the world operates. And now I believe we have a chance to do it all again. To be the great explorers of the next era.
Good afternoon, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. This is humanizing AI and how generative AI is changing the security landscape. My name is Sean Westman. I'm a technology partner at Ernst & Young, and I do Gen AI implementations. And I'm going to bring that perspective to our conversation here today, along with 20 years of cybersecurity experience. I am joined on stage by 4 amazing colleagues, and dare I say it, friends, people we've come to work together with over the last several weeks and develop some interesting perspective. I think we have a lot of important perspective that we'd like to cover. So let me jump right in, and we look forward to hopefully having some time for questions at the end. In my experience implementing generative AI, what I've come to learn is that generative AI is a very ubiquitous term, but in actual fact, it has a number of very important nuances. So whether we be talking about it from the perspective as a tool for personal productivity, it's a very different conversation than when we talk about it as a tool for enterprise functional transformation or for enterprise operations. And so what I'd like to do is use the first moment or so to ask Liz. Liz, would you please introduce yourself and help us get oriented for thinking about Gen AI in the context of cybersecurity?
Thanks, Sean. It's lovely to be here today at Mobile World Congress, and I think we do have the luckiest topic talking about Gen AI and security. So I'm Liz Green, the European Advisory and Cyber Leader at Dell Technologies. What does that mean? So I help large organizations look at different emerging technologies and really understand how they can leverage that to be more operationally resilient and cyber resilient. So that means over the last 3 years, it's been AI, then ML, and now this little topic called generative AI. And so we're looking at that today. And I think it'd be really helpful to answer your question to really focus us. So we're not going to be talking about how we look at protecting the Gen AI models. While that's a great topic, it's quite vast. What we are going to be talking about, because it is the debate stage, is how we leverage Gen AI for good, particularly around cybersecurity. How can we leverage it to be able to better respond and recover in the event of a cyber incident? And also, unfortunately, how are cyber criminals leveraging this technology to their benefit? So disinformation, misinformation, deep fakes. So that's what we'll explore today. Hopefully that gives us a little bit more of a focus.
That's super helpful. Thank you, Liz. And let's dig into that for a second. Chris, I've seen you at conferences for years. You're a statesman in cybersecurity. So why now, right? AI, machine learning. If you go to a big cyber conference, they've been on every placard of every booth for many years, but it feels different right now. What makes this moment different? Why in the year since OpenAI and the release of ChatGPT, why Why is there so much focus on Gen AI right now and what it means to us in cybersecurity?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll just take a moment. Chris Novak, I lead the cybersecurity consulting division at Verizon. So for those who may not be familiar, doing everything from GRC to incident response to threat intelligence. And for anybody who may have read our Verizon data breach investigations report, if you're familiar with that, that's a product that my team actually puts together. So there's a lot that we do as it relates to trying to understand these kind of trends, and in particular what it looks like from a threat landscape perspective. In terms of why now?
Yeah.
When I talk with my colleagues, I always find this conversation interesting because a lot of times people will say, well, we've been doing AI for years, if not decades. What's different? And I think the way we looked at AI before was much more around more computer or computational automation. It was, how do we build an algorithm that can just do things at scale repeatedly over and over again? And it was mainly for efficiency. And Gen AI obviously does that as well, but it takes it kind of a whole other kind of quantum leap forward and looks at it through the perspective of not just can we program a model to do something, but it can learn. And Gen AI, and the reason why I think we're talking about it now is we've reached a point where it's much more like human behavior than just purely programmatic. It's not just us saying, do this, then this, then this, if this, then do that. It actually has the ability to observe and change the way it's acting. And so I think that's the reason why now, and we're seeing the real world use cases of it when we look at things like ChatGPT and other similar types of technologies that are out there.
Fascinating. So let's then think about it. Olivia, if I can, maybe you could introduce yourself and reflect on it a little bit. We've been building cyber programs for years, decades really, right? What did our cyber programs look like, and did they contemplate the introduction of technologies like generative AI? And yeah, maybe we could just comment on that for a moment.
Yes, so thank you, Sean, for the invitation. I am Olivier de Peyret, Executive Vice President of Orange Cyber Defense, which is a cybersecurity pure player owned by Orange. And I've been appointed only 3 months ago. And I was, before that, in the public sectors dealing with the MOD issues, and I was the head of the French Cybercom. So that's for me. So let's begin with, Sean, if you allow me, the security landscape before GenAI, and then to see what has changed then. So everything is beginning with threat analysis. And what we have seen in terms of trends, the first one is cyber extortion, which is the most preeminent, form of attack. We've seen that because of the increase of the victims, plus 46%. We have seen that because of geographical lateralization. We've seen, obviously, in Europe and US, a lot of cyber extortion attacks. However, in India, Oceania, Africa, there's a huge increase of this kind of attacks. The second main trend is regarding, the organization, the manufacturing, financial, public sector. We've seen an increasing, numbers of new attackers, and especially in the large organizations, they concentrate the most important, incident figures of the segmentation of the markets. However, we've seen, and it's very new, more and more small and medium-sized companies being touched by this cyber extortion phenomena. And thirdly, the activism. It is important because for 2 years now, we have seen a lot of concentration of attacks coming from activism, which is blurring the line between state-sponsored actors, activism, cyber criminal. It's like cyber criminal being more political and activism being more criminals. That's like that. So this is the landscape. And what is changing with GI is the sophistication, the scaling of attacks. So we are coming in a new world where the GI may improve and accelerate all the trends that I just mentioned. And what is important for us, and this is my first answer, is you may be extremely close to the clients to get a long duration partnership with them in order to be able to mitigate the risk and to understand the environment in order to prevent the GI dynamics.
Fascinating. So, Ilya, maybe you can build upon that because I know that you maintain responsibilities for security and operations, amongst other things. Practically speaking, how have you seen Gen AI being used by adversaries in your operations?
Yeah, so for the ones who don't know me, I'm leading fraud and security products within Mavenir. I'm with Mavenir already for quite a long of time. And Mavenir is actually providing solutions from radio all the way into the core messaging and protection, cyber security as well as anti-fraud. And we have been actually protecting our customers worldwide against various malicious attacks. And actually this year we're starting to see increased usage of Gen AI tooling by the attackers. So if you look at the average attacker, fraudster, they will use all the tooling they have to their exposure to execute the attack. They are not limited by any technology, they are not limited by any regulation, by any rules. Their idea is to generate money or infiltrate an organization. And we have seen right now increasing amount of, well, for example, ChatGPT usage because it's free almost, or free of charge, as a tool to craft scam attacks. And it's becoming extremely difficult for the traditional systems to protect our customers. Our customers are usually mobile operators, but also to protect normal human beings, so our consumers. So Gen AI represents an ideal tool to craft or fake, well, essentially generate deep fakes and impersonate communication, which represents actually a huge threat to financial industry, to telco industry, and actually everything what we do in cyber. Because the biggest risk in cyber is insider attack, right? And that's where Gen AI is being used today. And well, we are facing the situation where we as a vendor, we have to leverage exactly the same technology. However, it becomes much more complicated because we're dealing with real-time factors.
Excellent. So I'm going to ask Chris if you could build upon that for a minute. So I think, Olivier, you talked about the programs and how they're designed to address some of the threats that are represented by actors using generative AI maliciously. Ilya, you talked specifically about some of the activities you see. Chris, maybe you could imagine for me, how might we expect to see Gen AI used by malicious actors in the years to come?
Sure. So this is something we've actually been studying a lot of. And in fact, I mentioned the DBIR earlier. This is actually something that we're looking at in terms of our research for the next iteration soon to come. So stay tuned for that. I can't tell you too much there. But in terms of kind of what I would say we see, from the recent past and where I kind of would predict the future going is looking at it. Obviously, there's the elements of crafting better phishing stories and narratives and things like that. I think that's obvious. I think the probably less obvious avenues are going to be actually around some of the coding techniques that might be able to be available to threat actors, as well as just the ability to automate certain elements of reconnaissance, penetration, lateral movement, all the typical things that we would usually see a threat actor do, but be able to do it at scale and with the ability to influence it with additional knowledge or data that can be gleaned from the environment. And so it's interesting when we look at and examine the way a threat actor group works, and I think you guys touched upon this, is that they often kind of almost operate like a business. They're looking at how to make the most with having to put the least into it, whether that least is time or money or resources or a combination of all of the above. And I think some of the same benefits we get out of and that you've described around what Gen AI might bring from a defensive perspective, they're basically flipping the script the other way and saying, how can they leverage it to do the exact same thing, or I guess you might say the other side of the coin, when it comes to the offensive side of it. So I think that's really a lot of what we're going to see, and it's going to continue to develop and evolve.
Excellent. So considering that we're here at a telecom conference, I'm going to open this one up for everybody. What specifically, what type of threat might Gen AI represent in the hands of a malicious user to telecom?
Well, maybe let me get started, right? So I already alluded to that. We see right now Gen AI being used in growing scam attacks.
Yeah.
And the tooling like ChatGPT essentially increases the scale of the attack tremendously. And we as kind of telco vendors or telcos, we're facing the challenge with a real-time factor of that attacks. An attacker can craft the attack, and they can take, well, maybe hours or even days to craft and program that with the programming side of GenAI, and then launch the attack that we have to detect and prevent in real time, right? So real-time factor is an important factor in telco that we deal with. So everything what we do on cyber side, on fraud side, has to do with real time. And the second factor that we're dealing with, telcos are highly regulated businesses.
Yeah.
And what fraudsters and attackers can afford, we sometimes cannot afford, because we deal with privacy, we deal with regulation, and we deal with various governmental sectors around us, exposing actually the whole industry to financial sector.
And I think just building on that, Ilia, one of the things we're seeing in the telco space is that they actually can be used almost in the way a supply chain attack would be used. So through the telco, you get access to the banks, to the governments. So I think that's one element we're seeing as well. Generative AI might make it easier for someone to be able to get through, whether it's an insider or otherwise, to who they really want and who might be able to pay them a bit more. So that's one insight.
And if I could just add on to what Liz said as well, I think from the telecom perspective, we see exactly those kinds of things where threat actors are looking to target the telecoms because they're the conduit to everything, right? I mean, think about it. Is there anybody here who doesn't have a mobile phone on them?
Right.
We're at Mobile World Congress. I'd be surprised if anyone said they didn't. But the reality of it is you get all of the information, all of your apps work based on the fact that it's connected to some mobile network that is the conduit between your ask and the information that you receive. So there's a lot of value to a threat actor if they can influence that conduit or intercept data or manipulate data or all of the above, and also consider the fact that there's a lot of other things that hang off those mobile networks, not just all of us, but government agencies, sensitive information, military apparatus, all sorts of other elements that have the potential that if you could influence, or I think you mentioned earlier, Liz, around misinformation and disinformation, there's the potential to really have a kind of chaotic outcome.
Yeah.
As you said, we do have an increasing responsibility. First, we are a critical infrastructure, and secondly, because of the connections with the clients you described. But we have also some strengths, I think, by your expertise and by your data, because we can, identify use case and train our AI app. We can also find relevant data in order to, train our, AI models and programs. So I think, yes, we have a huge responsibility, but we have the strengths and valuable strengths.
That's great. So I kind of want to build on that then a little bit. So telco plays a critical role in the supply chain, uniquely positioned to protect industries, right? Also uniquely positioned to be targeted. I think that calls upon a balance between private enterprise and public enterprise. So Liz, maybe back to you for a second. Can you comment on, the evolving government and regulatory frameworks or standards? There are many. And whether or not we're moving in the right direction, striking the appropriate balance between commercial and public-private partnership?
So the fun question of regulation. So my background is really helping financial services clients. So I'm going to be bold and say I've really seen regulation help, particularly Bank of England, DORA, SEC, seeing organizations that probably wouldn't have invested enough in terms of technology or talent really making strides to improve their operational resilience, their ability to recover, their protection of consumer data. So regulation is good. We need it. Do we need a new regulation for every technology that comes out? That's probably not super helpful. That said, I am really encouraged by the European AI Act in terms of ring fencing AI that they believe is tolerable, acceptable, not acceptable. And I think those guidelines are important. There's the Britain AI Safety Group as well that's looking at code and making sure that we're kind of double checking our work. Is this data good? Is it usable? Is this model safe and responsible? So it's a mix of both. We need it. Probably not for every single technology that comes out. I would hope that our regulations look at consumers and civilians regardless of what technology we have in 10 years.
Yeah, that's an excellent perspective. So definitely a need for it. Ilia, in your comments earlier, you actually made a reference to this. You said, hey, we have to deal with privacy and other forms of constraints which are designed for the benefit of people, but maybe you could talk about telco in specific. Is the regulatory regime working in an effective way to support telco? Are there any observations that you could share with the group?
Depending on the geography, right? Maybe we need to take a little bit of a step back and look at what we're dealing with. And again, back to the question what generative AI means this year for us. And we are in telco, right? You mentioned everyone has a phone, right? When I communicate with Chris, I see his mimics, I see his words, and sometimes I maybe tap him on the shoulder. So we have as human being, we have multiple feelings, and that translates directly into my mind and my actions. So if he asks me like to borrow $10 to go grab some coffee or something like that, well, I know him, he will go and he come back to me, right? When you deal with the handsets, right, we convert all our feelings and information into the content essentially, which is represented by text, voice, and sometimes video, right? And therefore, that's exactly what is being exploited by the attacker, left or right, in various types and forms in cyber fraud. So when you think about that, that means that when protecting our customers, we have to actually tap into the content. And there is a very thin line between the privacy and protection. And therefore, some of the governments, and we're working with some of them, like to name you, I think in UK we had a very good collaboration. In Belgium, we're working with regulatory in Australia. There is a very thin line to figure out what's the balance between privacy infringement and effectively protection. And sometimes a lot of consumers probably are ready to give away a little bit of their privacy in order to be protected, to prevent that eventually someone will perform the huge financial transfer from their bank account or will expose them on their jobs while they may be in security operations center, right? So this is the thin line that is being discussed right now, but throughout a number of regulators worldwide. And I think, some of the geographies made a very good progress. I think France is one of the examples. Right now, the regulation took the approach that we better protect people rather than we would be observing too much of the strict privacy laws. But there is still a lot to come because, Gen AI represents a totally new dimension that we have to deal with. And we need to build that expertise also within the industry.
Very good. Okay, so then back to the programs, Olivier, if I could. Do you think the conventional cybersecurity protection strategies are sufficient against the emerging misuses of generative AI? And what do you recommend we consider as we think about our cyber strategies?
So, cybersecurity market is always on the move. So we have to be adapted on that very dynamic, motion. We are not, going from scratch. We do have also identify in our detection and anticipation capacities some way to improve and to accelerate our solutions. Like in the detection, solution, the endpoint and detection response, where we try to accelerate the way we identify previously unknown malware, or in our CM solutions, where we try to detect anomalous traffic or use behavior. On the anticipation phase, we are trying to improve our reverse engineering of malware to generate domain names. So we did not wait GI. However, what is changing is exactly what has been said, is the speed. The speed of awareness, the speed of answers. That is mainly the new paradigm for GI. And my recommendation, the first one will be to upskill our teams and to have a mix of hiring of our expertise. It's no more a technical, response. It's a team building response with people enabling the analysts coming from their environment, the business environment, and the technical solutions. So it's a new team building with a multidisciplinary expertise to deal with it. The second is to, create a new dynamic, new automation in all the identification solutions, in the containment processes, and moreover is to see with the feedback after an attack how we close extremely quickly the loop with the detection phase. So this is a question of accelerating all the processes and to hire new expertise in order to better be in a position to face this new GI threat.
Amazing. So moving with speed and scale, integrating the right skills and expertise, and expanding our resource base to really think about this differently.
Exactly.
That's an excellent set of recommendations. So why don't we do that and open it up to the entire panel here? And I'll start here, Chris, if it's all right. We'll move down to you, Liz. If you were to make one recommendation to the enterprises and companies that are here at this conference, what would you recommend they focus on in light of Gen AI and its misuse, but also potentially its use in protecting our enterprises against cybersecurity threats?
Sure. So the one piece of advice that I would always give is the importance of having a strong governance model. So if it is something that exists within the environment, that you've got the right understanding of the controls to wrap around it, as well as the risk, pro or against, in terms of how it fits into the overall business. And I think from a cybersecurity standpoint, I'm very optimistic that I think it will play a very good role in the defensive posture. I think it's an area where we have an advantage in some cases over the adversaries, where we don't often have an opportunity to say that.
Well, from my side, I think I would like to leverage on what Olivier was saying. Right now, it's a new tool, and it's a new era, and that requires new expertise. So investment into the expertise of the team that would understand the mechanics of the attacks and think of the creative ways to protect, because actually existing controls in the network within the vendor community, they already exist, and sometimes they don't need to be that complicated. But for that, you need to have right expertise. People right now that are dealing with the cyber, they cannot really be focused on just one single lane. I switch on TLS and I'm done, right? Mm-hmm. No, they need to overlook at the whole situation holistically. What is the attacker trying to achieve? What kind of tooling they're trying to use? And what kind of controls do we have to our availability to prevent that? So that could be one of the use cases within the Camara API project. That, of course, could be the utilization of the Gen AI capability within the network or even in the cloud, but also existing tooling. The expertise and approach needs to change to oversee the whole problem more holistically.
Very good.
Well said, both of you. I think I'm going to answer it from the lens of Dell, so how we're looking at this. So it's going to be one for the price of three. So the way we're looking at Gen AI is first and foremost protecting the use of AI, so within our company, within our employees. Second is protecting against AI. So how do we look at how bad actors might use generative AI against our company? And then how do we protect with AI? So how can we improve our own cyber defense using generative AI? So those are some of the ways I would recommend you look at this as well.
Very, very good. So we have 3 minutes left. Are there any questions for our panelists on generative AI in the context of cybersecurity? So let me pose a question to you then. I was thinking about cybersecurity. There is an illustrative example that's been talked about in the news a lot. It's used, it's referenced frequently. It was the example of a deep fake created of an executive communicating a message, and then that message being exploited to the tune of a $25 million payment. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, whose responsibility is it in the organization to detect deep fakes, on the internet, for example, and where does this responsibility lie? So I'll maybe start with you, Chris, and we'll run down the table. But is this a cybersecurity, a CISO responsibility, or does it fall somewhere else?
I think that's going to be a very controversial question. Probably should have started the debate with that. So I think, honestly, I don't think there's one real clear defined answer on that. I think you're going to see that there's going to be a lot of organizations that are going to kind of fight back and forth over whose responsibility is that. Is that cybersecurity? Is it IT? Is it fraud? Is it loss prevention? Is it HR? So I think, honestly, from my perspective, I think we're probably still a ways away from that. And then also, you have the element of content providers, or a lot of times we're seeing this happen also in things like social media. So people have an opinion on whether or not they should be policing the content for things like this as well. So I think that's still very much open for debate. I don't know if my colleagues want to add.
I was just going to comment, the Munich conference was recently, and I'm sure some of you were maybe there or had read about it. I think we saw a lot of the majors, so Microsoft, Google, Meta, come to the table and say, we want to collaborate together and stamp out deepfakes. Whether that's them taking responsibility, I don't know, but I think there is an element of, if it's your technology, then yeah, absolutely, it's in your best interest. But I think a collective response and a collaborative response is key, and we've learned that in cybersecurity across the board. We're not going to stamp this out as one company by ourselves, but working together, public, private sector, and all of us playing a role, I'm sure, on this stage as well.
Mm-hmm. Because of all the social and political impacts of what you've described, it's a new way to partners with the major, with us as a private company, and the state responsibility. So we have to reinvent, I think, the link between this triangle, inside this triangle.
Exactly. The power here would be only in collaboration of all parts of the sector, starting from the telcos all the way through the vendors.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I would like to say thank you to these panelists who I think shared a number of wonderful insights, and thank you to MWC for sharing this stage with us so that we could speak to each of you. We'd be happy to speak with any of you afterwards if you'd like, or if you have any questions. But many thanks to each of you today for coming.